influence, violence, and fear. To the feds, that is a recipe for racketeering. And in a federal courtroom today in Manhattan, the prosecution team in the Sean Diddy Combs trial made it crystal clear to the jury that it does not matter if you're not a mob family like the Gaudis. It doesn't matter if, say, you're a rap music mogul like Diddy. The law is the law, and Diddy broke it over and over again, they said. In her 4-hour closing argument today, Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic made it real easy for this jury. She told them they don't even have to believe everything that the prosecutors have laid out over these last 7 weeks. She said it only takes one single freak-off that was the product of force or fraud or coercion. And that, she said, equals sex trafficking, period. The mere act of supplying people in those freak-offs with drugs, that includes enough crimes right there to equal racketeering, she said. Prosecutor insisted that Diddy used his Bad Boy Entertainment employees to keep the cocaine, the ketamine, the ecstasy, and the other drugs flowing and the freak-off participants awake and compliant. But she said that he also allegedly used those same assistants and his security staff for crimes that an old-school mob boss might recognize. Crimes like kidnapping. Here are the cases that the prosecutor actually laid out. She said that Cassie Ventura was forced to stay in a hotel for a full week in 2009 until her bruises were no longer visible after being beaten by Diddy. And that an ex-Diddy employee named Capricorn Clark was kidnapped twice. Once by a Diddy stooge named Uncle Polly, they said, who threatened to dump her body in the East River. And another time by Diddy himself, they said, while on a mission to kill the rapper Kid Cudi, who was dating Cassie at the time. As for another racketeering crime, arson. The prosecutor said Diddy's alleged firebombing of Kid Cudi's Porsche certainly does count, as does bribery. When the prosecutor reminded the jury of the $100,000 that Diddy allegedly paid to keep that hotel's surveillance video of Cassie being beaten senseless under wraps. As far as the sex trafficking charges go, the government told the jury that just because Cassie and Jane may have been willing in some of the freak-offs does not mean they consented to all of them. And they said it only takes one. If they didn't consent to one, then it's sex trafficking, then it's forced labor. Did he refuse to take no for an answer, the prosecutor said, and rarely in his adult life did he have to. But now, she said, it is time to hold him accountable. And believe me when I tell you, I have literally just skimmed the surface of a speech that went on almost 5 hours and teased up the defense for an uphill climb in their closing arguments tomorrow. Joining me now to dig a little deeper is Emily Hagan, who has been reporting from the Diddy trial for weeks now. First of all, Emily, did I get your name right? Emily Hagan?
You did. Exactly.
Okay, good. All right, so I saw your TikTok today, and you talked about a vibe shift. Tell me about that.
100%. I've been covering this since jury selection, and up until today, I feel like the content creators and it's kind of felt like a circus out there. I'm going to be honest. It's like everyone's out there live streaming, they're making their TikToks, people are fighting on the streets, but today, it was as eerie as how the weather was in New York. It was cloudy. People came into the courtroom and it was like they sucked all the energy out of you like a vacuum. And even Diddy himself's body language mirrored all of the reporters in the crowd and the hundreds of law students that traveled across the country today to come and fill up 3 overflow rooms, which we haven't seen yet. Usually when I get to court, they say, go up to room 24B, that's the overflow room, if you can't make it into the main courtroom. Today, they were like, head up to 15A. They had opened up 2 extra overflow rooms because that is how much attention this case drew on the closing day. So it was a really crazy vibe shift, Ashley.
Well, so the vibe shift, like people screaming outside, people angry about getting, a place. It was aggressive.
There's always that. I don't know if you've been seeing all the TikToks, but people are screaming every day. Just to secure a spot in the courtroom, people are spending hundreds of dollars on line sitters just to sit in a courtroom. So people were aggressively pushing themselves to the front of the line today, like unlike anything I've ever seen before. But usually in the overflow room, when we're hearing witnesses on the stand, there's like jokes being made by the judge. And today there was just none of that. It was the prosecutors brought such a strong case and they were so serious that nobody was moving. Everybody was completely still, including Diddy, who he's normally like passing notes, making jokes to Tenny Garagos. And today he was sitting back in his chair, completely still, almost like a statue. I feel like it is the final act and it is finally hitting him that this is not a Wild King night. This is not a show anymore. Like, this is reality sinking in for him and for everybody at the case.
All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get into it.
Courtroom today.
First of all, Eva, it was packed. For the first time since the beginning of the trial, every member of the Combs family was there, all 6 of his children, his mom. They all crowded into the row designated for family. At one point, Sean Combs even seemed to be, saying squished together a little bit to make room. But there were attorneys for some of the witnesses. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, was in the room to hear prosecutors give their closing statement. So it was packed. But for the start anyway, Sean Combs appeared pretty relaxed. He walked into the courtroom, he put his hand over his heart, a gesture toward his family, and he's been reading a book, The Power of Positive Thinking.
I'm curious, how was Combs? You mentioned it a little bit there. Did he interact any more with his family? What was his interactions with his attorneys like today?
A bit with the family. He did scribble a number of notes during the prosecutor's summation, writing them on little Post-its, handing them over to his attorneys. But at one point, I thought it was interesting. He sat far back, his chair pushed far back from the table, away from his usual confiding position with his attorneys, Eva, and had his head down, whether in thought or reading notes, but it seemed a moment where he might have been, as much as he can be these days, by himself.
I'm curious, Aaron, how long did the government's closing arguments take today?
It was almost 5 hours, and I have to say, it did not necessarily feel like it. The prosecutor's presentation for the last 7 weeks has been rather sprawling, and at times it felt disjointed. Witnesses testified that may or may not have had anything to do with one another. Today was the chance for prosecutors to try to tie all of that together, and all of the evidence about hundreds of freak-offs that the jury heard about, saw graphic footage of. And today, prosecutors said a single freak-off is enough, that the jury just had to find that sex trafficking elements were met by prosecutors one time in order to convict.
Can you tell us more about the prosecutor who delivered today's closing arguments?
Christy Slavic is an experienced federal prosecutor. She actually has a background in gangs and
All right, welcome back. A lot of people inside that courtroom, and especially over on the defense's side, where you're seeing more of Diddy's support system and family come to court today to really kind of be here for the final days of the trial, pretty much. Of course, that being summations, aka closing arguments. So we saw everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Charlucci, who's one of Diddy's very close friends, who's been inside that courtroom every single day of trial and even was attending some of those pre-trial hearings too. We saw Keisha Combs, that's Sean Combs' sister, Justin Combs, Sean Combs' son. Quincy was there again. That's also Sean Combs' son. Lisa Hilton, who is the mother of Justin Combs, was there. Sarah Chapman, who is Diddy's daughter, Chance's mother. And then, of course, the twins were there, that being Delilah Combs and Jesse Combs. And so it's interesting. The only one that notably was absent from what I could see inside the main courtroom was just Christian Combs. But everybody else, and I should also say probably his youngest daughter, that being Love, she wasn't there inside the courtroom. But I think notably also some interesting faces that are inside that courtroom today, too. Maybe not necessarily on Sean Combs' side was Doug Wigder, who we all know to be Cassandra Ventura Fine's attorney, as well as Jay Clayton, and that's the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. So a lot of famous faces are inside that courtroom, a lot of people that we're very familiar with as we've been following this case pretty closely. Oh, and I think I forgot Karen Nicolos inside that courtroom too. So it's a lot of people there really trying to see what these summations are going to be, both on the prosecution side and then once we get to the defense's closing tomorrow, obviously, for the
everywhere. But most of the jurors sat stone-faced, listening to what amounts to the humiliating recollection of a decade's worth of a woman's sex life.
Aaron, what can we expect to see in court tomorrow?
More of the same. Cassie Ventura ended her testimony today, taking jurors to a moment they've already seen video of, what happened in the Los Angeles hotel in March of 2016. The jury had already seen the video, but they saw it again with Cassie narrating it, saying, "That's me," pointing to herself on video and telling the jury this was the first and only time she tried to escape a freak-off before Sean Combs declared it over. She said she got hit by Combs, she had a black eye, and she wanted to leave, but when she tried to, as the jury saw in video, he dragged her back.
Aaron Katursky for us there at the courthouse.
All right, y'all. So we are going through and we are giving y'all day 1, day 2, day 3. Just a little recap, because what they're doing is they're doing closing arguments. So let's take a listen and see what they're saying.
Physically, emotionally, psychologically.
In graphic, lurid detail, Combs' former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, testifying what she says happened behind closed doors during those now infamous so-called freak-offs.
So Cassie, when she testified about these freak-offs, she said that it started early in the relationship. She was young, she was naive, and she wanted to satisfy Combs. But she didn't think that this was something that was going to be regular. And it became almost on a weekly basis.
And it got to a point where, as she testified about it, she said, "This was my job. This is what I did."
Cassie seated in the witness box once again.
They had to call their star witness out of order because she is 9 months pregnant and she's due June 1st.
She says she participated in hundreds of freak-offs during her 11-year relationship with the music mogul. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him. Diddy is, of course, known as a prominent recording artist going back decades. Hits like "I'll Be Missing You."
Give anything to hear half your breath. I know you still.
All right, so y'all get the idea, y'all get the gist.
What did we learn?
Well, this was part of the defense strategy, to concede that he's a drug user. Now, maybe the public didn't know the extent, but the defense was pretty frank that at one point he was addicted to opiates. At one point he flew to Mexico to try what Cassie Ventura called a plant medicine type remedy that's not legal in the United States, that the two together tried just about every drug, MDMA, ecstasy, ketamine, that the night of the now infamous freak-off in 2016 in the Los Angeles Intercontinental Hotel, where an assault was then captured on video, that maybe Combs was high on a bad batch of MDMA. But the idea here, Eva, I think, was to say that the violence from Combs was not to coerce Cassie Ventura into sex. It was the result of drugs, or in another aspect, was the result of jealousy and her infidelity. Because we also heard today, Eva, about her dating Kid Cudi and about her dating the actor Michael B. Jordan, and how that led to some pretty scary arguments.
What do you think was the standout moment of the day?
So I think it was kind of hard to piece together what the standout moment was, because as Aaron Katursky pointed out, the cross-examination seemed to meander at times. And I think on top of that, never really got to land the plane for the point they were trying to make. But as I've been following this case, I thought the timeline was very interesting, because we know certain facts about this case. Cassie Ventura, when she releases her album, of course, when Kim Potter, the mother of Sean Combs' twin daughters and one son, when they had those children, when they broke up. And what's really important, I think, is near this end, because this is what the defense is trying to really hone in on, that all of this back and forth, the alleged rape, the consensual sex that she had after the alleged rape, when her now husband finds out about all of this, what the defense is trying to make a point of is the breakup between Cassie and Combs really happens just before Kim Potter dies. And we all know very publicly that Sean Combs comes out and says Kim Porter was his soulmate. And I think they're trying to make the argument that that's why this all broke up. Not because of the alleged rape, not because of the freak-offs, but because of this. Really trying to weave in this narrative of jealousy in this case.
They really were trying to kind of talk about the jealousy, the infidelity, that pattern between the two of them. Chris Brown was mentioned today. Apparently, Combs accused her of dancing with him. She denied that.
About her dating Kid Cudi for a point of...
Westmoreland challenging Dawn Richard's memory and her accounts, which she noted in some cases changed up to 4 times when she recalled specifics one way and then another and then another and then another. And finally, Dawn Richard said she was recalling things to the best of her ability, but the defense sought to portray her as someone whose memory could not be relied on by the jury, somebody who was out for money, who sued her, Sean Combs, in civil court, and somebody who may have been out more for revenge because she was angry that Sean Combs eventually dismantled the 2 groups she was part of, Diddy Dirty Money, and before that, Danity Kane.
I also want to talk about the reported freak-off in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. That came up again today. Carrie Morgan was on the stand. That was Cassie Ventura's former best friend. What did Carrie say happened after that incident?
Cassie Ventura left the Intercontinental Hotel, went back to her apartment, her home, and there was Carrie Morgan waiting. She said immediately she saw the black eye that Ventura had testified Combs gave her after the freak-off got violent, and the whole reason why then the subsequent assault in the hallway happened. And then Carrie Morgan said about a half hour later, Sean Combs starts banging on the door with a hammer. It was not let in, but she said she heard him yelling, finally called some of Combs' staff members to try to get him to leave. Police were called, but Cassie Ventura said, and Carrie Morgan backed this up, that nothing ever came of it because Cassie Ventura refused to say anything about Sean Combs and what happened to her.
Aaron, I have to ask you, because Combs was sitting just feet away from Dawn Richard and Carrie Morgan in court today, how did he react to seeing them and hearing all of this?
He's been an attentive listener. In some cases, he would shake his head or nod along or consult with his lawyers, scribbling a lot of notes. This was an important part of the testimony because it made a turn, Eva. The jury had heard from Cassie Ventura directly about, in rather explicit terms, a lot of the sex acts. But the prosecution's whole case is that she was coerced into that sex because of the violence, the kind of violence that both Dawn Richard and Carrie Morgan said they witnessed. Now, the defense says there are other reasons for the violence. Jealousy, drugs, didn't have anything to do with coercing her into sex. For Sean Combs, he remembered traveling in London, and Combs didn't like the taste of ketchup in the UK, so he had to have equity loan to come up with the money and wired it according to instructions sent by Combs's bookkeeper. Now, Regina Ventura was blackmailing her. Regina Ventura said
His love for Heinz 57 ketchup from a former personal assistant, as prosecutors try to use his testimony to establish Diddy's leadership of an alleged criminal enterprise. Coming up, what he said about an alleged incident involving Combs and rival Suge Knight at a diner that made him feel like his life was in danger. Plus, Dawn Richard's attorney Lisa Bloom joins us after her client's big day in court. But first, let's start in Lower Manhattan, outside the federal courthouse. ABC News chief investigative correspondent Aaron Kutursky back there again today. Aaron, you were once again there in court. Cassie Ventura's mother, Regina, took the stand. What did she say?
Regina Ventura said she was physically sick by an email that her daughter had sent her just before Christmas in 2011. Eva, it indicated that Sean Combs was blackmailing her. Regina Ventura said this email, and the jury saw it, read that he was going to release 2 explicit tapes because Combs had found out she was dating Kid Cudi, and also threatened to harm both Cassie Ventura and Kid Cudi. And she said she became scared for her daughter's safety and agreed to send Combs $20,000 that he had apparently demanded to recoup some of the money that he had spent on Cassie. She said she took out a home equity loan to come up with the money and wired it according to instructions sent by Combs's bookkeeper. Now, Regina Ventura said the money ultimately came back, but this testimony backed up Cassie's assertion that she had, in effect, been blackmailed, and federal prosecutors said that blackmail was meant to coerce her into sexual acts. There's something so voyeuristic about this entire trial, this lurid look into the private and often violent sex life of Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura so far. And what Dawn Hughes did was firmly ground it in trauma, in psychological principles about trauma, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. And she could not testify about the specifics. Expert witnesses are not allowed to clinically examine a witness or a victim or the defendant. But generally, she talked about why abuse victims stay in abusive relationships and how they cope with the abuse. And some of the things that she described mimicked the testimony of Cassie Ventura and others, how she felt like she couldn't get out of the relationship because he controlled her finances. Her friend Carrie Morgan and Dawn Richard both mentioned how during a beating that Combs would inflict, that they said they witnessed, she would curl up in a fetal position. And Dawn Richard and the expert, Hughes, said that one coping mechanism is to curl up in the ball on the floor.
We also heard from a former employee of Sean Combs, George Kaplan, who was called to testify. Who is he?
He was a former assistant. About 15 months, he worked as Sean Combs' executive assistant. He said they're one of 4 of them during his tenure. And for a time, he was meant to be the cleanup man from the freak-offs. He said he would first stock the hotel rooms. He said there was a hotel bag that contained baby oil and Astroglide and other items that the jury's already heard about. And then he was meant to clean up the hotel rooms himself, tidy them up, he said, to protect Combs' reputation.
I have to ask you, at one point he was able to get an immunity order. What was the reaction when that happened?
Well, the jury didn't see it, but he said he was otherwise going to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. We don't know why he wanted it. We don't know whether he's about to testify about crimes that potentially he committed that would necessitate that kind of an immunity. He did testify, though, about procuring illegal drugs for Combs. He said he would give cash that Combs gave him and then bring Combs the bag of drugs, including one that contained MDMA.
Aaron Katursky there at the courthouse. Thank you so much. Let's dig into all of this. We've got our ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, with us. You were also there in court today. So, Brian, just bring us into that room. What was the biggest moment of the...
She took her home and had a doctor friend come and examine her.
I don't know.
To say that he was running.
There were...
Or what? And at one point he let out a big yawn when he's talking about things that, have been talked about in the entertainment world for more than a decade. This car fire that Kid Cudi endured in 2012. But it's significant now, Eva, as federal prosecutors try to convince the jury that Sean Combs used arson as part of the criminal enterprise that he was running.
There was a whole scuttlebutt about if he could talk about what happened